My name is Elena Vance. I am 35 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I was standing in a sterile morgue, scalpel in hand, about to perform an autopsy on my own mother. My husband and sister were outside, crying for the cameras, waiting to inherit my $10 million surgical center. But when I leaned down and whispered into my mother's ear, "I know you're breathing, Evelyn," her eyes snapped open in terror. They thought they had faked a tragedy to ruin me. They didn't know I had already turned their stolen inheritance into a $15 million federal debt trap. I want you to freeze that frame right there. The morgue was a constant 40 degrees, a biting, clinical chill that smelled of formaldehyde and the sharp metallic tang of industrial-strength bleach. I stood there, the rhythmic hum of the industrial cooling units the only sound in the cavernous room, staring at the woman on the stainless steel table. Evelyn Vance looked remarkably peaceful. Her skin had been powdered to a waxy, translucent pale, her lips tinted a faint, necrotic blue by a professional makeup artist who clearly specialized in the macabre. To any other medical examiner, she was a tragic casualty of a sudden cardiac event. To the world outside those heavy, double-insulated doors, she was the matriarch of Greenwich high society, whose grieving family was preparing for a multi-million-dollar transition of power. I felt the weight of the scalpel in my hand, a cold silver promise of absolute truth. My hands didn't shake. After 15 years of cutting through flesh to find the rot underneath, I had learned that the human body is just a complicated ledger. Everything leaves a mark. I looked at the heart monitor I had secretly hooked up to the underside of the steel table, the wires hidden beneath the draped shroud. A steady, rhythmic pulse, 48 beats per minute. She was athletic for a woman of 62, I'll give her that. She was holding her breath with a discipline that was almost admirable, if it wasn't so profoundly demonic. "Before I make the first incision, Mother," I whispered, my surgical mask brushing against her cold, makeup-caked cheek, "I want you to know that the federal agents are already in the hospital lobby. They aren't here for the body. They're here for the bank records." I saw the smallest twitch in her left eyelid, a flicker of survival instinct that no amount of acting could suppress. I leaned closer. "Marcus and Chloe are already signing the transfer of liability forms in the consultation room. They think they're signing for the hospital's assets. They're actually signing for your $5 million offshore gambling debt. I bought that debt this morning, Evelyn, and I've just called it in." Her eyes snapped open. The blue tint on her lips cracked as her mouth gasped for air. The waxy, dead matriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered predator. "Elena, you wouldn't," she wheezed, her voice a dry, papery rattle in the cold room. "I already did," I said, stepping back and setting the scalpel down with a sharp clack against the metal tray. "Now stay still. We have a live feed going to the boardroom, and your performance is about to become a federal deposition. Before I take you back to the exact moment this monstrous alliance was formed, please take a quick second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But only if you believe that karma is a debt that must always be paid in full. Also, drop a comment down below. Where are you watching from right now? And have you ever realized that the people you were trying to save were the ones holding the knife to your back? I read every single one, because in my world, the truth is the only thing that stays sterile. Now let me tell you how I became the quiet, devastating architect of my own family's total ruin. I grew up in the kind of Greenwich mansion where the silence is so heavy it feels like a physical weight. My parents, Robert and Evelyn Vance, didn't view children as human beings. We were assets to be managed, accessories to be displayed. My father was a high-stakes real estate developer who moved money through shell companies like a magician, moving a coin between his fingers. My mother was the social architect, a woman who could destroy a person's reputation with a single, whispered comment at a charity gala. In our house, there was a very clear, very cruel hierarchy. My younger sister, Chloe, was the golden child. She was effortlessly beautiful, pathologically entitled, and smelled perpetually of Dior and Daddy's money. Chloe was the trophy. She was groomed for a life of luxury and leisure. I, on the other hand, was the utility child. I was the one with the high SAT scores, the one who spent her weekends in the library while Chloe was at equestrian camp. My mother used to tell me that I was tough and resilient, while Chloe was sensitive and fragile. What she really meant was that I was the workhorse and Chloe was the rider. The disparity was breathtaking. When I worked 2 jobs during my residency to pay off my student loans my father had promised to pay but forgot about, my parents bought Chloe a $300,000 condo in Manhattan because she was feeling overwhelmed by the city. When I tore my ACL during a marathon, my mother told me to walk it off because she didn't want to deal with the insurance paperwork. But when Chloe had a mild bout of food poisoning, my mother chartered a private jet to bring a specialist from Switzerland. I thought I could escape the cycle when I built the Vance Surgical Center. It was my crowning achievement, a state-of-the-art facility specializing in robotic neurosurgery. I didn't use a dime of family money. I used my own patents, my own investors, and my own sweat. By 35, I was the sole owner of a $10 million empire. And that was when the parasites decided to move in. The first snake to enter the garden was Marcus. Marcus was a corporate attorney, polished, handsome, and possessed an easygoing demeanor that I mistook for stability. I was a world-class surgeon, but I was a novice at intimacy. I was so used to people taking from me that when Marcus offered to handle the stress of the business side, I thought it was love. I didn't realize that Marcus wasn't protecting my assets. He was cataloging them. We had been married for 5 years when the headaches started, not mine, Evelyn's. My mother began experiencing blinding migraines and fainting spells. Every time I visited her, Marcus and Chloe were there, whispering in the corners, looking at me with pity. "Your mother is very sick, Elena," Marcus would say, his hand resting on my shoulder in a way that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "She needs a radical procedure, and she only trusts you to do it." I was suspicious, but when I saw the MRI results Marcus provided, results showing a deep-seated vascular malformation, my surgeon's brain took over. I didn't see a manipulative mother. I saw a patient. I didn't know then that Marcus had used his legal connections to have a radiologist forge those scans. I didn't know that the final illness of Evelyn Vance was actually the opening act of a meticulously planned corporate heist. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. They didn't just want my money, they wanted the legacy of the Vance Surgical Center to be the pedestal for their own ascension. 3 months before the autopsy, I began noticing small, jagged cracks in the financial foundation of my life. A signature on a property tax document I didn't remember signing. A transfer of corporate treasury bonds to a private account in the Caymans. When I asked Marcus about it, he would wrap his arms around me, the scent of expensive bourbon on his breath, and tell me I was overworked and experiencing burnout. "You're a genius with a scalpel, Elena," he'd whisper, his voice smooth as silk over a bed of thorns. "But you don't have the stomach for the dirty work of high finance. Let me protect you. Focus on the patients. Focus on your mother." I might have believed him if I weren't a woman who spent her life looking for microscopic anomalies. I didn't confront him. I didn't change the passwords. Instead, I called the one man I knew could operate in the dark as effectively as I did in the light, Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a former intelligence officer who specialized in asset protection and retrieval. He was a ghost, a man with no social media presence and a wardrobe that was entirely shades of gray. I met him in a rainy parking garage, and I handed him a list of names. "I need to know everything my husband does when he's not with me," I told him. "And I need to know why my sister suddenly has a $500,000 deposit in her influencer account from a corporate shell company." 1 week later, Sterling handed me a folder. Inside were photographs that turned my blood into liquid nitrogen. There was Marcus, my devoted husband, entering a luxury hotel suite in Manhattan with my sister, Chloe. There were logs of their private messages, discussions about how they were going to liquidate the cold bitch's assets and move to Europe once the Evelyn situation was resolved. But the most devastating piece of evidence was a recording from my mother's bedroom. "Is the POA ready?" My mother's voice asked, strong and vibrant. Nothing like the weak, dying woman she played when I was in the room. "It's ready." Marcus replied. "The moment Elena performs the experimental surgery, I'll have the witness testify that she was emotionally unstable. We'll trigger the incapacity clause in her contract. The surgical center becomes mine, the trust fund becomes Chloe's, and your gambling debts, well, they simply disappear into the corporate restructuring." I sat in my office that night, the folder resting on my lap, and I realized that my entire family was a pack of hyenas waiting for me to bleed out. They had been counting on my empathy. They had been counting on the fact that I loved them enough to be blind. They were wrong. The experimental surgery for my mother was scheduled for a Tuesday. The stage was set. My mother collapsed in the foyer of her mansion, a rehearsed performance that would have won her a Tony. Paramedics, hired by Marcus, rushed her to my hospital. Marcus and Chloe were there, wailing in the hallway, begging me to save her. "I'm the only one who can do this procedure," I told them, playing my part. I looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the hunger. I looked at Chloe and saw the greed. I walked into the OR, but I didn't make a single incision. My mother was placed under a mild sedative, not the general anesthesia they expected. We sat in that sterile room for 4 hours, the monitors beeping a fake rhythm, while my surgical team, my actual loyal team, sat in silence, watching the clock. In the middle of the procedure, a nurse ran out to the waiting room and told Marcus that there had been a complication. My mother had died on the table. The performance that followed was a masterpiece of vultures. Marcus immediately produced a stack of legal documents. He told the hospital board, who he thought were under his thumb, that since Elena was clearly traumatized and mentally unfit after the death of her mother, his medical power of attorney and corporate proxy were now in effect. He and Chloe began signing papers right there in the waiting room, transferring ownership of the hospital's land and equipment to a Vance Thorne Holdings. They thought they were inheriting a gold mine. They had no idea they were signing for a federal liability. Let me pause here for a second. Have you ever watched someone smile while they thought they were destroying you? Have you ever had to keep a straight face while a narcissist told you they were doing you a favor by taking everything you owned? Tell me in the comments, how did you resist the urge to scream? I want to know your tactics for surviving the velvet trap. Now back to the morgue. My mother was lying there, waiting for the all-clear signal from Marcus. She was supposed to stay dead for 6 hours, then be resurrected in a private crematorium where Marcus would help her flee the country with a new identity, leaving me to face the massive medical malpractice lawsuits they had already drafted. But Marcus didn't realize that I had spent the last 48 hours buying up his world. You see, Marcus wasn't just a traitor, he was a gambler, just like my mother. He had leveraged his own law firm's assets to fund the affair with Chloe. He had used my mother's $5 million debt to a high-stakes syndicate as leverage to keep her in line. I didn't just find the debt, I contacted the creditors. I offered them 10 cents on the dollar over their asking price for the right to own the Vance debt. I bought the debt. I bought the mortgage on the Manhattan condo. I even bought the lease on the Ferrari Marcus had just surprised Chloe with. In the eyes of the law, I wasn't just the grieving daughter. I was the primary lien holder for every single person in that hallway. When I leaned down in that morgue and whispered to my mother that I knew she was breathing, I wasn't just exposing her lie. I was initiating the foreclosure of her life. "Get up, Evelyn," I said, my voice as cold as the slab she was lying on. "The makeup is smearing, and the FBI is tired of waiting." She scrambled off the table, her shroud falling to the floor, her blue-tinted lips trembling. "Elena, please. It was Marcus. He made me do it. He said you were going to put me in a home." "Marcus didn't make you lose $5 million at an underground casino in Macau, Mother," I replied, handing her a towel to wipe off the dead makeup. "And Marcus didn't forge those MRI scans. You did that for him." I walked toward the double doors, the metal heels of my surgical clogs echoing like gunshots. "Now, let's go join the party. Marcus is about to make his big announcement, and I wouldn't want to miss the look on his face when he realizes he just signed a contract that makes him legally responsible for your $5 million debt." The doors to the boardroom swung open. Marcus was standing at the head of the table, a champagne flute in one hand and my hospital's seal in the other. Chloe was beside him, already scrolling through European real estate listings on her phone. As the new majority owner of Vance Surgical, Marcus boomed, I want to propose a toast to... He stopped. The glass didn't just fall, it shattered. Chloe shrieked, her phone hitting the mahogany table. Standing in the doorway was me, still in my surgical scrubs stained with fake blood, and right behind me was our mother, pale, trembling, and very much alive. The toast is a bit premature, Marcus, I said, walking into the room. I believe you have some questions to answer about the $15 million poison pill you just authorized. Marcus's face went from a triumphant, flushed red to a sickly, translucent gray. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. He looked at Evelyn, shrouded, makeup smeared, and shaking, and then at me. His hands, usually so steady when drafting the contracts that ruined people, began to tremble. Elena, Evelyn, he stammered, the champagne on the table bubbling over the edge of the broken flute. There's been a mistake. The doctors, they said you were gone. They said there was a cardiac arrest. The only thing currently arresting, Marcus, is your career, I said, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table and sitting down with the clinical grace of a woman about to explain a terminal diagnosis. Chloe, ever the narcissist, recovered her voice first. What is this? Evelyn, why aren't you... You know, we were about to hold a memorial. I already picked out the black dress for the Vogue feature. She turned her venomous gaze on me. And you're supposed to be in a psych ward, Elena. Marcus said the trauma of Mom's death broke you. He has the witness statements. I smiled, a thin, chilling expression that never reached my eyes. Marcus has statements from actors he paid to lie. I, however, have the digital forensic data from the servers you were using to plan your little exodus to Lake Como. Marcus tried to stand, to reclaim some shred of his lawyerly authority. Elena, don't be dramatic. You're having an episode. We can discuss the hospital management once you're stable. I have the signed power of attorney. Actually, Marcus, I interrupted, leaning forward. Let's talk about those papers you just signed in the consultation room. You were so eager to seize my shares that you didn't even bother to read the addendum on page 58. I tapped my tablet, and the projector on the wall flickered to life. It displayed the very document Marcus had just signed 10 minutes ago. I highlighted a specific clause in bright, glowing yellow. In corporate law, we call this a reverse liability merger, or more commonly, a poison pill, I explained, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low hum. By signing this transfer of ownership into Vance Thorne Holdings, you didn't just take the assets of this hospital. You legally and personally assumed 100% of the debts and liabilities currently attached to the Vance estate. Marcus squinted at the screen, his eyes darting across the legalese. What debt? The hospital is in the black. It's worth $10 million. The hospital is fine, I agreed. But Mother's gambling debt? The $5 million she owed to the syndicate in Macau? The $3 million in unpaid back taxes from the shell companies she used to fund your Manhattan trysts with my sister? I bought all that debt this morning through an anonymous LLC, and then I attached it to the hospital's land deed as a corporate lien. The room went so silent I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. You just signed for $15 million in federal and private debt, Marcus, I said. And because you used your legal credentials to bypass corporate compliance and forge my mother's medical records to trigger the takeover, the debt isn't civil. It's criminal fraud. You didn't steal a hospital. You walked into a vault and locked the door from the inside. Chloe's jaw dropped. What? $15 million? Marcus, you told me we'd be billionaires. You said she was a weak, stupid doctor who didn't understand money. And you, Chloe. I turned to my sister, who was now clutching her stolen Cartier bracelet as if it could save her. I hope you enjoyed the Ferrari. I called the dealership an hour ago. Since the lease was funded by corporate embezzlement and signed under a false identity, mine, they've already dispatched the repo team to your Manhattan condo, along with the police. Evelyn, finally finding her footing in the wreckage of her own plan, lunged toward Marcus. You told me she wouldn't find out. You said we'd be safe in Switzerland. She slapped him, hard, the blue waxy makeup from her fingers staining his expensive suit. Marcus didn't even react to the slap. He was staring at the door. He was a corporate shark. He knew the scent of blood in the water, and he knew that in this room, he was the prey. I checked my watch. Mr. Sterling, you can bring them in now. The heavy mahogany doors didn't just open. They were pushed aside by 6 men and women in dark windbreakers. The letters FBI and IRSCI glinted under the boardroom lights. The lead agent, a woman with a face as hard as granite, walked straight to Marcus. Marcus Thorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to protected financial systems. Chloe started screaming, a high-pitched, jagged sound that filled the room. No, I'm just the sister. I didn't sign anything. It was all them. We have your text messages, Ms. Vance, the agent said, turning to Chloe. Discussing the liquidation of stolen assets is conspiracy to commit money laundering. You're coming with us, too. I stood up, smoothing my scrubs. I looked at my mother, who was being read her rights by another agent. She looked smaller than she had on the morgue table. She looked old, sallow, and pathetic. Elena, my mother wheezed, her eyes brimming with real tears this time. Please, I'm your mother. You saved my life once. Save me again. I walked over to her, stopping just inches away. I could smell the Dior perfume on her skin, the perfume she'd used to cover the waxy scent of the makeup. I saved a patient on that table, Evelyn, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. But as for my mother, she died a long time ago. She died every time she told me I was tough, so she could be cruel. She died every time she chose a parasite over a daughter. I looked at the agents. Take them away. I have a surgery scheduled for 10 o'clock, and I need to make sure my OR is properly sanitized. As they were led out in handcuffs, Marcus silent and broken, Chloe sobbing about her followers, and my mother wailing for a daughter who no longer existed, I felt a strange, profound sense of weightlessness. Let me pause here. Watching my husband and my sister share a pair of handcuffs while my mother begged for mercy, did I feel a twinge of regret? For years, I had been the family's shock absorber. I had been taught that family was a debt you could never pay off. But standing in that empty boardroom, I realized that the only debt that mattered was the one I owed to myself. Have you ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to be the hero in your own? Tell me in the comments. When did you finally decide that blood wasn't an excuse for betrayal? I have one final part of the story to tell you, because the checkmate wasn't just about the arrests. It was about what I did with the ruins they left behind. The federal investigation moved with the same relentless, automated precision as the robotic scalpels in my operating room. Because the evidence Mr. Sterling and I provided was cryptographically verified and backed by 20 years of the family's own sloppy financial history, there was no room for Marcus to maneuver. The corporate shark who had spent his career finding loopholes finally realized he was swimming in a tank with no exits. Marcus was disbarred within 60 days. The news made the front page of the New York Law Journal. Prominent attorney indicted in 15 Nimidair's fraud and identity theft scheme. During the trial, his defense attempted to paint me as the unstable wife, but my team of neurosurgeons and the hospital's board of directors stood in the witness box and testified to my absolute clinical excellence. The judge didn't just reject Marcus's claims. He sanctioned his legal team for attempting to weaponize medical gaslighting in a court of law. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and unauthorized access to federal systems. He lost his firm, his reputation, and every dime he had tried to siphon from my life. The last time I saw him, he was being led out of the courtroom in a standard-issue jumpsuit. He didn't look like a high-stakes wealth manager anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a thief who got caught. Chloe didn't fare much better. The golden child found out the hard way that federal prosecutors don't care about Instagram follower counts. Because she had actively conspired to liquidate stolen assets and had used my identity to secure luxury leases, she was sentenced to 4 years. Her influence evaporated overnight. Her sponsors dropped her. Her Manhattan condo was seized by the repo team I'd tipped off, and she became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unearned entitlement. As for Evelyn, the mother who had viewed my body as a spare parts bin, the irony of her fate was the sharpest cut of all. After her resurrection in the morgue, her health actually did begin to deteriorate. The stress of the indictment and the loss of her financial safety net caused her liver, the liver I had saved, to begin to struggle. But this time, there was no private jet. There was no Swiss specialist. Because I had legally severed all financial ties and filed for a restraining order, I removed her as a dependent from my premium corporate insurance. She was forced to rely on state-funded medical care and move into a small, assisted living facility in a town she would have previously mocked. She tried to call me one last time, 6 months ago. She sounded weak, her voice a fragile ghost of the woman who used to dictate the social hierarchy of Greenwich. "Elena," she whispered, the sound of a heart monitor beeping in the background. "I'm sick, truly sick this time. Please, I'm your mother." I sat in my office, looking out at the city skyline, and I felt a profound, chilling sense of peace. "I know you're sick, Evelyn," I said, "and as a doctor, I've made sure you have the best care the state can provide. But as a daughter, that part of me died on your morgue table. I performed the autopsy on our relationship, and the results were conclusive. It was terminal." I hung up, and I never looked back. I rebranded the Vance Surgical Center. It is now the Sterling Institute for Medical Integrity. I donated $5 million, the exact amount of my mother's gambling debt, to a foundation that provides free legal and medical advocacy for victims of elder abuse and familial financial exploitation. Looking back, the scar on my abdomen is no longer a mark of sacrifice. It is a trophy of survival. I want to end this story by talking to you about something the medical world calls referred pain. It's when you feel a sting in one part of your body, but the source of the injury is somewhere else entirely. For 35 years, I thought my pain was my own fault. I thought I was difficult or unlovable. I didn't realize the source of the injury was the people who were supposed to be my home. Toxic families operate on the belief that your value is a currency they are entitled to spend. They will convince you that you are tough so they can be cruel. They will call you selfish the moment you stop letting them bleed you dry. But remember this. You are the architect of your own soul. You do not have to provide the bricks for someone else's mansion while you are left shivering in the rain. Setting a boundary is not an act of hate. It is an act of surgical hygiene. Sometimes you have to cut away the infected tissue so the rest of the body can live. I am Elena Vance. I am no longer a bank. I am no longer a shield. I am a woman who finally learned that the most important life I ever had to save was my own. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If my story resonated with you, if it helped you realize that you aren't alone in your struggle with a toxic family, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. Your life is yours to own. Don't let anyone else forge your signature on the deed. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.